Isabella Marino sat alone in her wheelchair at Willowbrook Cafe, 24 candles flickering on a birthday cake no one would share. The daughter of tech billionaire Alaric Beckett had everything money could buy, except the one thing that mattered most. When Liam Sterling walked in with his 8-year-old son Noah, he saw something that would change 4 lives forever. A young woman drowning in loneliness despite her father's empire. What started as a simple question, "Mind if we join you?" would spark a love story that threatened to tear apart one of the most powerful families in the country. Because when Alaric discovered his paralyzed daughter had fallen for a struggling single father, he would stop at nothing to destroy their happiness. But he underestimated the power of a love that saw past wheelchairs and bank accounts, and the fierce courage of a woman who would risk absolutely everything for her first real taste of genuine human connection. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun filtered through the vintage lace curtains of Willowbrook Cafe, casting golden patterns across the worn wooden tables. Isabella Marino sat motionless in her custom wheelchair before a simple vanilla birthday cake, 24 candles flickering in the hushed atmosphere. The cafe was nearly empty at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, which was exactly why she had chosen this time, this place. She wanted to be alone with her misery. Her reflection in the cafe window showed a young woman who should have had everything. Designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Perfect makeup applied by a personal stylist, jewelry that sparkled with the cold fire of diamonds. But her eyes told a different story. They held the hollow look of someone who had been surviving rather than living for far too long. 20-4 years old today. 3 years since the accident that had stolen her legs and seemingly her father's ability to look at her without flinching. The wheelchair wasn't just a medical necessity. It had become a barrier between her and the rest of the world, a constant reminder of everything she could no longer do, everywhere she could no longer go without assistance, every dream that had been crushed along with her spine. The cake sat untouched, its cheerful yellow frosting and delicate sugar flowers mocking her solitude. She had ordered it herself online, having it delivered to the small, family-owned cafe in the arts district of Havenbrook, far from the gleaming towers of her father's tech empire, far from the sterile perfection of their cliffside heights mansion, far from the carefully managed world where every interaction was filtered through assistants and bodyguards. Isabella closed her eyes and tried to remember what birthdays used to feel like. Before the accident, she had been pursuing her master's degree in environmental engineering, passionate about developing sustainable technologies. She had friends, then real friends, who invited her to hiking trips and weekend getaways, who saw her as more than her father's wealth. She had dreams that extended beyond the family business, plans that involved making the world a better place through innovation and environmental protection. Now, those friends had gradually faded away, unsure how to relate to her new reality. Some had tried, but the weight of her depression and her father's overprotective hovering had eventually driven them off. Others had simply disappeared when the invitations to glamorous events stopped coming, revealing the shallow nature of relationships built on access rather than affection. The accident itself was a blur of twisted metal and shattering glass. A drunk driver running a red light, the sensation of her car spinning through the intersection like a carnival ride gone wrong, then darkness. She had awakened in a world where her legs would never again carry her up mountain trails or across university campuses. But worse than the physical paralysis was the emotional distance that had opened up like a chasm between her and her father. Alaric Beckett had built quantum dynamics from nothing, transforming it into a tech empire worth billions through sheer force of will and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate market trends. He was a man who could negotiate trillion-dollar deals before breakfast and command the respect of world leaders. But faced with his daughter's broken body and shattered dreams, He had retreated into what he knew best, throwing money at problems and delegating emotional complexities to professionals, the best doctors, the most advanced rehabilitation facilities, a mansion retrofitted with every possible accommodation, a team of physical therapists and caregivers available around the clock. He had provided everything except the one thing she needed most: himself, his presence, his assurance that she was still his daughter, still worthy of love, still valuable beyond her ability to walk. Instead, their interactions had become formal, scheduled affairs. Weekly dinners where he updated her on company developments, and she nodded politely, both of them carefully avoiding any topic that might venture into emotional territory. He spoke to her the way he addressed his board of directors, with professional courtesy but no real warmth. She had become another problem to be managed, another asset to be protected, rather than a human being to be loved. The worst part was the pity she saw in people's eyes, the careful way they spoke to her as if her paralysis had somehow affected her intelligence as well. Even the household staff, kind as they were, treated her like a fragile piece of art that might shatter if handled too roughly. She had everything material comfort could provide, but she was drowning in a sea of loneliness so profound it sometimes took her breath away. Today, sitting in this quiet corner of Willowbrook Cafe, surrounded by the gentle hum of coffee machines and the soft murmur of other people's conversations, Isabella felt the weight of another year passing without meaning. Another birthday marked not by celebration, but by the stark reminder of everything she had lost. The candles continued to burn, wax beginning to drip onto the pristine frosting, while she sat paralyzed not just in body but in spirit, unable to even make a wish because she had stopped believing that wishes could come true. The silence stretched around her like a bubble, separating her from the warmth and life happening at other tables. She was an island of isolation in a room full of connection, a living ghost haunting the edges of other people's happiness. 24 candles for 24 years, and she had never felt more alone in her life. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly, its gentle melody cutting through Isabella's melancholy like a knife through silk. She didn't look up initially, accustomed to being invisible in public spaces where her wheelchair made her either an object of uncomfortable pity or simply something to be politely ignored. But then she heard a sound that made her heart contract with unexpected longing, the bright, uninhibited laughter of someone young. Liam Sterling stepped through the doorway, his carpenter's clothes dusted with sawdust and smelling faintly of cedar and varnish. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, his calloused hands gentle as they guided his 8-year-old son Noah through the door. Noah was a whirlwind of energy barely contained in a small body, his dark hair tousled from whatever adventure had preceded their arrival at the cafe, his eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that made the world seem full of infinite possibilities. "Dad, can I get the chocolate chip muffin? The really big one with the sparkles on top?" Noah's voice carried the particular brand of enthusiasm that only youngsters possessed, the kind that could turn a simple trip to a cafe into an expedition worthy of excitement. Liam smiled, ruffling his son's hair with a tenderness that spoke of countless similar moments. "We'll see what they have available, buddy. Remember what we talked about?" Inside voices and being polite to everyone, Noah recited dutifully, though his volume had barely decreased. His attention span, however, was already wandering, and his gaze landed on Isabella sitting alone with her untouched birthday cake. Something shifted in Noah's expression, the innocent joy dimming slightly as he processed what he was seeing. He had been raised by a father who had taught him to notice people who looked sad or lonely, to recognize when someone might need a friend. His mother's absence had made him particularly sensitive to isolation, and his young heart immediately recognized a kindred spirit. "Dad," Noah whispered, tugging on Liam's flannel shirt with the urgency of someone who had just discovered something important. "Look at that lady over there. She's all by herself on her birthday. Liam followed his son's gaze and felt something tighten in his chest. The young woman sat in perfect stillness, surrounded by the trappings of celebration, but radiating a loneliness so profound it was almost tangible. Her wheelchair was clearly expensive, custom-made, and her clothes spoke of wealth beyond most people's imagination. But money, he had learned through his own struggles, was often the poorest cure for heartbreak. He recognized something in her posture, the careful way she held herself, as if taking up less space might make her pain less noticeable. It was the same way he had carried himself in the months after Sarah's death, when every breath felt like an act of defiance against a universe that had taken away the most important person in his world. She looks really sad, Dad. Like how you looked when you missed Mommy really bad. Noah's observation was delivered with the brutal honesty that only young people possessed, the kind of truth that cut straight to the heart of things without bothering with adult pretenses or social conventions. Liam knelt down to his son's level, meeting those earnest brown eyes that had inherited their mother's ability to see straight into people's souls. What do you think we should do, Noah? We should ask if we can sit with her. Nobody should have to eat birthday cake all alone. That's like the saddest thing ever. Noah's logic was unassailable in its simplicity, and Liam felt a surge of pride at his son's instinctive compassion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For a moment, Liam hesitated. He could see from Isabella's clothes and accessories that she came from a world far removed from his own. He was a working man with sawdust under his fingernails and paint stains on his shirt, the owner of a small woodworking business that provided a modest but honest living. She was clearly from the kind of wealth that his entire annual income wouldn't even make a dent in. What if she took their approach as presumptuous? What if she preferred her solitude? But then he looked at her face again, really looked, and saw past the expensive makeup to the raw pain underneath. He thought about Sarah, who had always taught him that kindness cost nothing and could change everything. He thought about the kind of man he wanted Noah to grow up to be, the kind of person who reached out to others instead of walking past their pain. "You're right, buddy," Liam said softly, standing and taking Noah's hand. "But we need to be respectful. If she wants to be alone, we'll respect that, okay?" They approached Isabella's table slowly, Liam's work boots quiet on the cafe's wooden floors. She looked up as they drew near, and Liam was struck by how young she was, probably not much older than he had been when Sarah died. Her eyes were a deep brown, beautiful but haunted, holding depths of sadness that seemed far too mature for someone who should have been in the prime of her life. "Excuse me," Liam said gently, his voice warm and carefully respectful. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but my son Noah and I were wondering if you might like some company for your birthday. Nobody should have to celebrate alone, and we'd be honored to join you if you'd like." Isabella's eyes widened in surprise, darting between the man with kind eyes and the boy who was practically vibrating with friendly energy. When was the last time someone had approached her simply to offer friendship rather than because they were paid to be there or wanted something from her father? When was the last time someone had seen her as a person worth spending time with rather than a problem to be managed or an opportunity to be exploited? Noah stepped forward with the fearless confidence of someone who had never met a stranger, his small hand reaching into his pocket to pull out a slightly crumpled homemade birthday card covered in crayon drawings of balloons and smiling faces. "I made this for my mommy today because it's her birthday too, even though she's in heaven," Noah announced matter-of-factly, holding out the card to Isabella. "But I think she'd want you to have it because she always said birthdays should be shared with friends, and you look like you could use a friend." The innocence of the gesture, the matter-of-fact way Noah spoke about death and generosity in the same breath, pierced through every wall Isabella had built around her heart. Isabella stared at the homemade card in her trembling hands. Its crayon. Drawings blurring through the tears she tried desperately to hold back. The simple kindness of these strangers had cracked something open inside her chest, unleashing 3 years of carefully suppressed emotion. She looked up at Liam Sterling, this carpenter with sawdust in his hair and genuine concern in his eyes. Felt something she hadn't experienced since before the accident, the possibility of being seen as human rather than as a problem. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She gestured to the empty chairs at her table with a hand that shook slightly. "Please, I would love the company." As Liam and Noah settled into their seats, Isabella found herself studying them with the intensity of someone who had been starved of authentic human interaction. Liam moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with manual labor, his hands bearing the honest scars of someone who created things rather than manipulated stock prices. Noah bounced in his chair with barely contained energy, already eyeing her untouched birthday cake with the enthusiasm of someone who believed cake was one of life's greatest treasures. The contrast with her usual birthday companions, her father's carefully vetted associates and the household staff who were paid to pretend they cared, was so stark it was almost painful. These people had chosen to be here, had seen her loneliness, and decided to do something about it rather than simply walking past. Isabella Moreno had learned to measure her life in the spaces between her father's scheduled appearances. At 24, she had spent the last 3 years existing rather than living, trapped in a gilded cage of her father's making that felt more like a beautifully appointed prison than a home. The accident had changed everything, not just her body, which would never again respond to her desperate wishes to stand and run, but her entire relationship with the only family she had left. Before that terrible night 3 years ago, she had been finishing her master's degree in environmental engineering at Stanford, passionate about developing sustainable technologies that could help reverse climate change. She had been preparing to join quantum dynamics not as Alaric Beckett's daughter, but as a qualified engineer with her own ideas and innovations. She had friends who invited her rock climbing on weekends, professors who challenged her thinking, a boyfriend who saw her as brilliant rather than wealthy. The accident had stolen all of that in an instant. Not just her ability to walk, but her identity as an independent woman forging her own path. The drunk driver who had run that red light had taken more than her legs. He had taken her future, her friendships, her sense of purpose, and most devastatingly, her father's ability to look at her without seeing his own failure to protect her. Alaric Beckett was a man accustomed to solving problems through force of will and financial resources. He had built quantum dynamics from a 2-person startup in a garage to a global technology empire worth $47 billion. He commanded respect from world leaders, employed over 100,000 people across 6 continents, and had revolutionized everything from artificial intelligence to renewable energy storage. But faced with his daughter's broken spine and shattered dreams, all his power and wealth felt meaningless. His response had been to retreat into what he knew best: business solutions and professional management. He had hired the best specialists money could buy, converted their Cliffside Heights mansion into a rehabilitation facility worthy of a high-end hospital, and ensured that Isabella had access to every possible medical advancement. What he couldn't provide was the emotional support she desperately needed, the reassurance that she was still valuable, still loved, still worthy of his time and attention. Their relationship had become a series of scheduled appointments. Monday evening dinners where he updated her on company developments with the same tone he used for board meetings. Wednesday morning physical therapy sessions where he watched from the corner, typing furiously on his phone rather than engaging with her progress. Friday afternoon family meetings with their team of lawyers and financial advisors, planning for a future that felt more like estate management than life planning. Isabella had become another asset to be protected rather than a daughter to be cherished. He spoke to her through intermediaries more often than directly, communicating his concern through increased security details and upgraded medical equipment, rather than through conversation and presence. She knew he loved her, she could see it in the way his hands trembled when he thought she wasn't looking, in the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying. But his love had become something clinical and distant, administered through bank transfers and staff briefings rather than hugs and shared meals. The loneliness had grown like a cancer, spreading through every aspect of her existence. Her old friends had gradually faded away, uncomfortable with her new reality and uncertain how to relate to someone whose entire world had shifted so dramatically. Some had tried to maintain contact, but the combination of her depression and her father's overprotective hovering had eventually driven them off. Others had revealed their true motivations when the invitations to exclusive events stopped coming, their friendship apparently contingent on her ability to provide access to her father's world. The household staff were kind, but professional, treating her with the careful courtesy reserved for employers rather than the easy familiarity of family. Her physical therapists and doctors were competent, but clinical, focused on her medical progress rather than her emotional well-being. Even her personal assistant, hired by her father to manage her schedule and social obligations, related to her more like a client than a person. Isabella had everything money could buy except the things that actually mattered: genuine connection, authentic relationships, a sense of purpose beyond simply existing as Alaric Beckett's damaged daughter. She had become a ghost haunting the edges of her own life, watching other people live while she merely survived, day after day, in increasingly elaborate comfort that felt more suffocating than nurturing. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had more material wealth at her disposal than most people could imagine in their wildest dreams, yet she was emotionally bankrupt. She could buy anything she wanted, travel anywhere her wheelchair could take her, hire anyone to provide any service she might need. But she couldn't buy what she wanted most: to matter to someone, to be seen as more than her disability or her bank account, to be loved for who she was rather than managed for what she represented. Liam Sterling carried his grief differently than most people. At 31, he had learned that loss could either break you or teach you how to hold pain and joy in the same heart, how to honor the dead while still living fully for those who remained. He watched Isabella with the careful attention of someone who had spent years learning to read the subtle signs of deep sadness, and he recognized in her carefully controlled composure the same brittle strength he had cultivated in the months after Sarah's death. 5 years had passed since the car accident that had taken his wife, but Liam could still remember with perfect clarity the moment a police officer had knocked on his workshop door to deliver news that would shatter his world into pieces. Sarah had been driving home from her job at Maplewood Elementary, where she taught 3rd grade with the kind of passion that made even the most reluctant students fall in love with learning. A patch of black ice, a moment of lost control, and suddenly Liam was a widower at 26 with a 3-year-old son who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. The months that followed had been the darkest of his life. Well-meaning friends and family members had offered advice about moving on, about how young he was, about how Sarah would want him to be happy. But Liam had quickly learned that grief wasn't something you moved on from, it was something you learned to carry, like a stone in your pocket that grew smoother with time, but never disappeared entirely. What had saved him was Noah, his son's absolute need for stability, love, and consistency had forced Liam to keep functioning even when breathing felt like an act of rebellion against a universe that had stolen away the most important person in his world. Noah had inherited Sarah's bright eyes and gentle spirit, but he had also inherited his mother's ability to find beauty and connection, even in difficult circumstances. Liam had been a carpenter even before Sarah's death, working for a larger construction company and building furniture in his spare time. But losing her had changed his relationship with his craft. Each piece of wood became a meditation on permanence in a world where nothing truly lasted. Each joint and groove a small act of faith that some things could be built to endure. He had eventually started his own business, Sterling Woodworks, creating custom furniture and home renovations that emphasized craftsmanship and durability over mass production and profit margins. The workshop behind their small house had become a sanctuary where he and Noah spent countless hours together. Liam taught his son to sand and measure, to respect the grain of the wood and the sharpness of the tools. But more importantly, he taught Noah to see beauty in simple things, to value kindness over wealth, and to notice people who might be struggling or lonely. Your mom always said that the most important thing we can do is pay attention to each other, Liam would tell Noah as they worked side by side on projects. Not everyone is good at asking for help, so sometimes we have to be brave enough to offer it first. Sarah had been the kind of person who noticed when her students were having trouble at home, who kept granola bars in her desk for anyone who might be hungry, who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends and always had time to listen to a neighbor's problems. She had taught Liam that true strength wasn't about building walls to protect yourself from pain, but about keeping your heart open, despite the risk of being hurt. Noah had absorbed these lessons with the serious intensity that youngsters brought to important matters. At 8 years old, he had already shown an extraordinary ability to sense when someone was sad or lonely, inheriting his mother's gift for emotional intuition. He collected stray cats and befriended the elderly neighbors, approaching the world with an openness that sometimes worried Liam, but more often filled him with pride. Their life wasn't easy. Liam's income was modest and inconsistent, dependent on commissions and word-of-mouth referrals that could disappear during economic downturns. They lived in a small house in Brookhaven, a working-class neighborhood where people looked out for each other, but money was always tight. Noah wore second-hand clothes and played with toys from thrift stores, but he had never complained about not having the latest gadgets or designer sneakers. Instead, their wealth was measured in different currencies. Long conversations over pancakes on Sunday mornings, building projects that turned into engineering lessons and problem-solving adventures. Evening walks around their neighborhood where Noah would wave to every person they passed and Liam would point out different types of trees and flowers. Camping trips where they slept under stars and told stories about Sarah, keeping her memory alive through shared remembrance and love. Liam had dated occasionally over the past 5 years, but nothing had developed into anything serious, not because he wasn't ready to love again, but because he had learned to distinguish between genuine connection and simple convenience. He wanted Noah to see what real partnership looked like, what it meant to choose someone for who they were rather than settling for someone who was simply available. The few women he had spent time with had struggled with his devotion to Noah, his refusal to compromise on parenting time or priorities. Some had seemed more interested in his potential for financial stability than in his actual character. Others had wanted him to put away the photos of Sarah, to pretend that his past hadn't shaped him into the man he was today. But Liam had learned that authentic love didn't require you to diminish one relationship to make room for another. Sarah would always be Noah's mother, would always be the woman who had taught Liam what it meant to be truly loved and accepted. Any woman who wanted to be part of their lives would need to understand that honoring the past wasn't the same as being trapped by it. Looking at Isabella now, sitting with Noah's homemade card clutched in her hands like a lifeline, Liam recognized something familiar in her expression. The careful control that came from learning to manage pain in public. The way she held herself slightly apart, as if expecting rejection or disappointment. The hunger for connection that she was trying to hide behind polite social conventions. Had seen the same look in his own mirror during those terrible months after Sarah's death, when every interaction felt like an acting performance and every smile was something he had to construct rather than something that came naturally. The difference was that Isabella's isolation seemed to come not from loss, but from a different kind of abandonment, the kind that happened when the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally began treating you like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. Over the following weeks, what had begun as a chance encounter at Willowbrook Cafe evolved into something neither Isabella nor Liam had expected. Friendship that felt both effortless and profound, built on the kind of mutual understanding that usually took years to develop. They began meeting regularly, always in public spaces where Isabella felt safe from her father's surveillance and where Noah could burn off his endless energy while the adults talked. Oakwood Park became their unofficial headquarters, a sprawling green space in the heart of Brookhaven where families gathered for picnics and youngsters played on elaborate jungle gyms. Isabella discovered that her wheelchair navigated the paved pathways easily, and she found herself looking forward to their Tuesday and Thursday meetings with an anticipation she hadn't felt about anything in years. Liam had a gift for treating her disability as simply another characteristic, like the color of her hair or her preference for coffee over tea. He didn't hover anxiously when she transferred from her wheelchair to a park bench, didn't speak to her in the careful, patronizing tone she had grown to hate from medical professionals and household staff. Instead, he talked to her about books and politics, asked her opinion on current events, and engaged with her mind rather than managing her limitations. "You know," Isabella said one afternoon as they watched Noah attempt to teach a group of ducks an elaborate hand-clapping game, "most people either stare at my wheelchair like it's fascinating or work so hard to ignore it that they end up ignoring me too. You're the first person in 3 years who's managed to see both me and the chair without making either one weird." Liam smiled, his attention split between Isabella and making sure Noah didn't fall into the duck pond in his enthusiasm. "My neighbor growing up was a veteran who'd lost his leg in Vietnam. Mr. Rodriguez. He taught me that equipment is just equipment. What matters is the person using it. Noah and I have learned a lot about adaptive sports from watching wheelchair basketball tournaments. Those athletes are incredible." It was exactly the right response, acknowledging her reality without making it the center of every interaction. Showing genuine respect for the disability community without treating her like an inspirational poster. Isabella felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen, a tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Their conversations meandered through safe territories at first, Noah's adventures at school, Isabella's thoughts on sustainable technology, Liam's latest woodworking projects. But gradually, as trust developed, they began venturing into deeper waters. Liam spoke about Sarah, not with the raw anguish of fresh grief, but with the warm depth of love that had been polished, smoothed by years of remembrance. She was one of those people who made everyone around her feel important, Liam told Isabella during one of their park meetings, while Noah played on the swings nearby. Her students adored her because she had this way of seeing potential in every single person. She used to say that everyone is carrying something invisible, some struggle or dream or fear that shapes how they move through the world. Her job was to notice those invisible things and respond to them with kindness. Isabella found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone, not even the expensive therapist her father had hired. She described the moment of her accident with clinical detachment at first, the drunk driver who had run the red light, the sensation of spinning through space, the strange disconnection between her mind and her body in the immediate aftermath. But gradually, she revealed the deeper wounds that had nothing to do with spinal cord injuries and everything to do with emotional abandonment. The worst part wasn't waking up paralyzed, she admitted during one particularly honest conversation. The worst part was waking up to my father's CEO face. You know, the expression completely professional, utterly in control, discussing my care with doctors like he was negotiating a merger. I needed my dad, and instead I got the man who runs board meetings. Noah had become their unofficial therapy facilitator, interrupting heavy moments with perfect timing and an 8-year-old's gift for asking exactly the right questions. He approached Isabella's wheelchair with the same curious interest he showed toward interesting bugs or complicated playground equipment, something worth understanding rather than something to be afraid of. "Can I push you sometimes?" he had asked during their second meeting, with the straightforward honesty that adults had trained themselves out of. "It looks like it might be fun, like a really slow roller coaster." Isabella had laughed actually. Laughed for the first time in months. "It's not quite as exciting as a roller coaster, but sure, you can push me on the flat parts. Just promise me you won't try to go down any hills." Noah had appointed himself as Isabella's personal tour guide to adventures she could participate in from her wheelchair. He showed her how to feed ducks without getting mobbed by aggressive waterfowl, taught her the rules of his complicated invented games that involved counting different colored cars in the parking lot, and shared his endless supply of knock-knock jokes with the serious dedication of someone performing important cultural work. But it was in the quiet moments between Noah's bursts of energy that Isabella and Liam developed their deeper connection. They discovered a shared love of mystery novels and spent entire afternoons debating the merits of different authors. Liam had strong opinions about sustainable building practices that aligned perfectly with Isabella's environmental engineering background, leading to passionate discussions about green technology and renewable energy systems. "You know," Liam said one afternoon as they watched Noah attempt to convince a particularly stubborn squirrel to accept his offerings of trail mix, "I keep expecting you to mention that your father owns half the companies we've been talking about reforming." Isabella felt her stomach clench. She had been dreading this moment, when Liam would inevitably connect her to the Beckett empire and everything would change. People always changed when they learned about her father's wealth. They either became calculating and grasping, or distant and intimidated. "You know who my father is," she said quietly, not quite making it a question. "Sterling Woodworks doesn't exactly move in billionaire circles. But yeah, I figured it out when Noah mentioned your last name. Moreno Beckett isn't exactly common." Liam's voice was gentle, free of the judgment or sudden interest she had learned to expect. "Does it matter?" Isabella looked at him carefully, searching for any sign that his entire demeanor had shifted, that he was suddenly seeing dollar signs instead of the person he had been getting to know. But his expression remained the same, warm, interested, present, still focused on her rather than on what she represented. "It matters to most people," she said carefully. "Well, I'm not most people," Liam replied with a smile that made something flutter in Isabella's chest. "I care about the person who makes Noah laugh and who knows more about solar panel efficiency than anyone has a right to. The rest is just background information." It was in that moment, sitting on a park bench while Noah tried to teach quantum physics to a family of ducks using Cheerios and hand gestures, that Isabella realized she was falling in love with Liam Sterling. Not the desperate, grasping love of someone drowning who would cling to any rescue, but the quiet, growing love of someone who had rediscovered that she was worth loving. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again, not Alaric, Beckett's damaged daughter, or a medical case to be managed, but Isabella, a woman with thoughts and dreams, and the capacity to matter to someone who had chosen to see her clearly. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and fresh rain as Isabella sat on the covered porch of Liam's modest house in Brookhaven, watching Noah chase fireflies in the small backyard. 3 months had passed since their first meeting at Willowbrook Cafe, and what had begun as casual park encounters had evolved into something deeper and more complex than either of them had anticipated. Tonight marked the first time Isabella had visited Liam's home, and the intimacy of the setting surrounded by his life, his choices, his carefully built world made her feel both vulnerable and cherished in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. The house itself was a testament to Liam's craftsmanship and character. What it lacked in size, it made up for in thoughtful details and warm personality. Hand-built shelves lined the living room walls, filled with an eclectic collection of books that ranged from advanced carpentry techniques to picture books about dinosaurs and space exploration. The furniture was clearly handmade, each piece showing the kind of attention to detail that spoke of love rather than mere functionality. Family photos were scattered throughout the space, pictures of Sarah, images of Noah at various ages, candid shots of their small family's adventures and quiet moments. Isabella had never been in a home that felt so genuinely lived in, so authentically warm. The contrast with her father's Cliffside Heights mansion was stark. Where Alaric's house showcased wealth and status through expensive art and designer furnishings, Liam's home radiated love and care through handmade touches and personal memories. Every surface told a story. Every room held evidence of a life built on relationships rather than achievements. "This is where Mommy used to read to me," Noah had announced proudly when he'd given Isabella the official house tour, pointing to a comfortable reading nook with built-in bookshelves and soft cushions. "Daddy built it special so we could have a cozy spot for stories. Sometimes I still sit here and pretend she's reading to me, especially when I miss her really bad." The matter-of-fact way Noah spoke about his mother's absence, the ease with which he navigated between missing her and celebrating the life they had built without her, had made Isabella's chest tight with emotion. This little boy understood something about resilience and love that had taken her years to even begin learning. Now, as evening settled around them and Noah's energy finally began to wind down, Isabella found herself alone with Liam on the porch. While Noah organized his collection of captured fireflies, which would be released before bedtime, according to the house rules about respecting living creatures. The string lights Liam had hung along the porch ceiling cast a warm glow over their conversation, creating an atmosphere of intimacy that made honesty feel both necessary and safe. "Can I ask you something that might be too personal?" Isabella sighed, her fingers nervously adjusting the soft throw blanket Liam had draped over her legs when the evening air had grown cool. Liam smiled, settling deeper into his handmade wooden chair. "After 3 months of park bench confessions, I think we're past the point of worrying about personal boundaries. Ask away. Ask away. Do you ever worry that you're somehow betraying Sarah's memory by caring about someone new?" The question had been haunting Isabella for weeks, as her feelings for Liam deepened, and she began to imagine possibilities she had thought were forever closed to her. "I know we haven't talked about what this is becoming between us, but I can see the way you look at me sometimes, and I want you to know that I would never want to compete with her memory or ask you to love me the way you loved her." Liam was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Isabella to Noah, who was now carefully releasing fireflies one by one, making elaborate wishes as each glowing insect disappeared into the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had wrestled with difficult truths and emerged with clarity. "Sarah and I talked about this, actually, in those last weeks when we knew the pregnancy complications were serious," he said softly. "She made me promise that if something happened to her, I wouldn't spend the rest of my life trying to recreate what we had. She said that would be an insult to both her memory and to whoever might come into our lives later. She wanted Noah to see what healthy love looked like, even if it looked different from what we'd shared." Isabella felt tears burning behind her eyes at the generosity of spirit it must have taken for a dying woman to give her husband permission to love again, to think beyond her own fear and pain, to imagine a future where he might find happiness with someone else. "She was extraordinary," Isabella whispered. "She was," Liam agreed, his smile soft with remembrance. "But so are you, Isabella, and what I'm feeling for you. It's not less than what I felt for Sarah, but it's not the same either. You're not Sarah, and I'm not the same man I was when I was with her. We've both been changed by loss and pain and growth. What we have together is entirely our own. The permission in his words, the recognition that love could expand rather than replace made Isabella's heart raced with possibilities she'd been afraid to consider. For the first time since her accident, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included partnership, intimacy, the kind of deep connection she had thought was forever beyond her reach. "I need to tell you something," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about the accident. About why my relationship with my father is so complicated. I've never told anyone the whole truth." Liam shifted his chair closer to hers, near enough that she could reach for his hand if she needed the anchor of physical connection, but not so close as to crowd her or pressure her into contact she wasn't ready for. It was a perfect example of his gift for reading her needs and responding with exactly the right balance of support and space. "The drunk driver who hit me," Isabella began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He wasn't a stranger. He was James Morrison, the son of one of my father's business partners. He'd been at a company party earlier that evening, celebrating some major acquisition deal. I know because I was supposed to be at that party too, but I'd skipped it to work on my thesis project." Liam's intake of breath was sharp, but he didn't interrupt, sensing that she needed to tell this story in her own way, at her own pace. James had been drinking at the party, but no one stopped him from driving home. Company policy, legal liability, all of that was more important than making sure someone didn't get behind the wheel drunk. When the police investigation started, my father's first call wasn't to me in the hospital, it was to his legal team. Damage control, image management, protecting the company's reputation, and maintaining the business relationship. The words came out in a rush now, 3 years of suppressed anger and hurt pouring out like water through a broken dam. The Morrisons settled out of court for an undisclosed amount that my father insisted was generous. James got a suspended sentence and community service. He's working for his father's company now, like nothing ever happened. Meanwhile, I'm in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, and my father acts like I should be grateful for how well everything was handled from a business perspective. Liam's hand found hers then, his calloused fingers intertwining with her smooth ones, in a gesture of support that felt like an anchor in stormy water. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion, "I am so sorry. That's not justice. That's not even close to justice. The worst part is that I think my father genuinely believes he did the right thing." Isabella continued, tears flowing freely now. "He got me the best medical care money could buy, made sure I was financially secure for life, handled all the legal complications so I didn't have to deal with them. But he never once asked what I needed emotionally. Never acknowledged that. His business relationship with the Morrison family meant more to him than justice for his own daughter. Never considered that maybe I needed him to fight for me instead of negotiating around me." Noah had finished releasing his fireflies and was now sprawled on a blanket nearby, drawing pictures in a notebook by the light of the porch lamps. His presence added a layer of normalcy to the heavy conversation. A reminder that life continued to move forward even in the midst of difficult revelations. "When I see you with Noah," Isabella said, watching Liam's son with wonder, "I see what it looks like when a parent puts their person first instead of their problems. You're not trying to manage his grief or control his healing process. You're just present with him, available, loving him exactly as he is, instead of trying to fix him into something more convenient." Liam squeezed her hand gently. "Noah makes it easy to love him, just like you do." The simple declaration hung in the air. Between them, honest and unadorned, carrying the weight of truth that didn't need elaborate explanation or justification. Isabella felt something fundamental shift in her chest, a wall she had built around her heart finally crumbling completely. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating to speak aloud. "I love the way you see people. Clearly, without trying to change them or manage them. I love how you've taught Noah to notice loneliness and respond with kindness. I love that you build beautiful things with your hands and that you honor Sarah's memory by living fully instead of just surviving. I love that you make me feel human again." Liam leaned forward then, his free hand cupping her face with infinite gentleness, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheek. "You are human, Isabella. You're brilliant and strong and compassionate, and perfect exactly as you are. Your father's inability to see that is his failure, not yours." When he kissed her, it was with the tenderness of someone who understood that she had been starved of authentic affection, someone who knew that physical intimacy could be an act of healing as much as passion. Isabella felt years of loneliness and isolation melting away, replaced by the warm certainty that she was cherished, valued, seen completely and loved unconditionally. "Dad, are you gonna marry Miss Isabella?" Noah's voice cut through their intimate moment with the perfect timing and brutal honesty that only 8-year-olds possessed. They broke apart, both laughing despite the emotional intensity of the moment. And Isabella felt a lightness in her chest that she had forgotten was possible. This was what family felt like, not the careful management of problems and image control, but the messy, beautiful reality of people choosing each other over and over again. "What do you think about that, buddy?" Liam asked, including Noah in the conversation rather than dismissing his question as inappropriate or premature. Noah considered this with the serious concentration he brought to all important matters. "I think it would be really good," he decided. "Miss Isabella makes you smile different than you used to, and she knows how to play all my best games. Plus, she's really smart, and she smells like flowers, and she never talks to me like I'm stupid. Just because I'm a kid." Isabella felt her heart expand to accommodate this wonderful little boy who had accepted her so completely, who saw her potential place in their family not as an intrusion or complication, but as an addition that would make their small unit even stronger. "I think it would be really good too," she said softly, meeting Liam's eyes with a promise that felt like the beginning of everything she had thought she'd lost forever. The surveillance photographs spread across Alaric Beckett's mahogany desk, like evidence in a criminal investigation, each image capturing moments of connection that should have filled a father's heart with joy, but instead ignited a cold fury that had been building for weeks. There was Isabella laughing at something the carpenter's son had said, her face bright with genuine happiness for the first time in years. Another showed her and Sterling sitting close together on a park bench, their body language speaking of intimacy that extended far beyond casual friendship. The most damning, in Alaric's view, was the image of them kissing on Sterling's modest front porch, Isabella's hand resting on the man's chest in a gesture of trust and affection that made Alaric's stomach churn with protective rage. Marcus Webb, Alaric's head of security and the man responsible for monitoring Isabella's activities, stood at attention beside the desk, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension radiating from his employer. Webb had been with Quantum Dynamics for 15 years, long enough to recognize when his boss was operating from emotion rather than logic, and experienced enough to know that such moments were dangerous for everyone involved. "How long has this been going on?" Alaric's voice was controlled, each word measured and precise in the way that had intimidated countless business rivals and made grown executives sweat during board meetings. "Approximately 4 months, sir," Webb replied, consulting his tablet for exact dates and details. Initial contact occurred at Willowbrook Cafe on Miss Isabella's birthday. Regular meetings began shortly after, primarily at Oakwood Park in Brookhaven. The frequency of contact has increased significantly over the past 6 weeks, including visits to Mr. Sterling's residence. Alaric studied the photographs again, his jaw clenched with the kind of controlled anger that had once inspired a rival CEO to describe him as a glacier with a temper slow to heat but capable of crushing everything in its path once it starts moving. His daughter looked happy in these images, genuinely happy in a way he hadn't seen since before the accident. But all he could see was vulnerability being exploited, innocence being manipulated by someone who understood exactly how much the Beckett name was worth. "What do we know about this Sterling person?" Alaric asked, though Webb's preliminary report had already been thorough enough to provide most of the relevant details. Liam Sterling, age 31, owner of Sterling Woodworks, a small custom furniture and home renovation business operating out of Brookhaven, Webb recited from his files. Widowed 5 years ago, raising his 8-year-old son Noah as a single parent. Annual income approximately $65,000, though it varies significantly based on seasonal demand and contract availability. No criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond a modest mortgage. By all accounts, he's well regarded in his community and among his clients. And his connection to Isabella began how exactly? Webb shifted slightly, recognizing that the truth wouldn't be what his employer wanted to hear. According to our investigation, it appears to have been entirely coincidental. Mr. Sterling and his son were at the cafe for their own purposes when they encountered Miss Isabella. Security footage from that day shows them approaching her table and joining her celebration. Alaric's laugh was harsh and without humor. Coincidental? How convenient. A struggling single father just happens to stumble across one of the wealthiest young women in the country sitting alone on her birthday. And he decides to play Good Samaritan. Webb, I didn't build a $47 billion company by believing in coincidences. Sir, with respect, our investigation has found no evidence of premeditation or prior knowledge. Mr. Sterling appears to have approached Miss Isabella simply because his son noticed she was alone. The security footage supports this interpretation, as does the timeline of their subsequent relationship development. But Alaric was already dismissing evidence that didn't fit his predetermined narrative. In his world, every relationship was transactional. Every kindness had an ulterior motive, and every person who approached his family was ultimately after access to power and wealth. The idea that someone might genuinely care about Isabella for her own sake rather than her bank account was so foreign to his experience that he couldn't process it as a possibility. A carpenter, Alaric said, the word dripping with disdain. A man who works with his hands for $60,000 a year thinks he can court a Beckett. The audacity is almost impressive. Webb remained silent, having learned over the years that contradicting his employer during these moments of righteous indignation was both futile and career-limiting. He had conducted the investigation thoroughly and professionally, and his findings painted Sterling as exactly what he appeared to be: a decent man who had shown kindness to a lonely young woman and had developed genuine feelings for her over time. But Webb also understood that Alaric Beckett was a man accustomed to seeing enemies in every shadow and threats in every unexpected development. What's his angle? Alaric continued, pacing behind his desk with the restless energy of a predator. Planning an attack. Is he after a settlement? A marriage that would set him up for life? Access to company secrets through pillow talk? There has to be something. Men like him don't approach women like Isabella without calculating the potential payoff. The irony was lost on Alaric that his own inability to see past his daughter's wealth and status was precisely what had driven her into the arms of someone who valued her for entirely different reasons. His protective instincts, warped by years of corporate warfare and high-stakes negotiations, had transformed into paranoid suspicion that saw predators where others might see potential family. Sir, Webb said carefully, our psychological profile of Mr. Sterling suggests that his interest in Miss Isabella is likely genuine. His behavior patterns, his relationship history, his interactions with his own son, everything points to someone who values personal connection over financial gain. He's never shown any interest in exploiting his relationships for material benefit, and his lifestyle suggests someone who's content with modest means. Alaric waved away this analysis with the impatience of someone who had made up his mind before. requesting the investigation. Everyone has a price, Webb. Everyone. This man has discovered that his price might be higher than he ever imagined, and he's using my vulnerable daughter to access it. I won't allow it. The dismissal of Isabella's agency in her own romantic choices was automatic and absolute. In Alaric's mind, his daughter was incapable of making sound decisions about relationships, not because of any intellectual deficit, but because her disability had somehow rendered her judgment suspect. The fact that she appeared happy and engaged for the first time in years didn't factor into his calculations. If anything, it made him more suspicious of Sterling's motives. "What are your recommendations, sir?" Webb asked, though he suspected he already knew the direction this conversation would take. "We end this, quickly and permanently," Alaric said, his voice carrying the finality of someone issuing orders that would be followed without question. "I want you to approach Sterling directly. Make it clear that his relationship with Isabella is unacceptable and needs to cease immediately. Offer him compensation for his time and trouble, something generous. Enough to be tempting but not so large as to suggest weakness on our part. And if he refuses the offer..." Alaric's smile was cold and calculating, the expression he wore when dealing with business rivals who had underestimated his willingness to play hardball. "Then we move to more persuasive measures. I want a complete financial analysis of his business, his mortgage, his custody arrangements. Sterling Woodworks operates on thin margins in a competitive market. It wouldn't take much pressure to create serious problems for him. And single fathers are always vulnerable to questions about their fitness as parents." Webb made notes on his tablet, though something in his gut rebelled against the direction this was heading. He had spent weeks investigating Sterling and had found a man who was, by all accounts, an excellent father and a decent human being. The idea of destroying his life simply because he had shown kindness to Isabella Marino felt wrong in ways that went beyond professional objection. "There's one more thing, sir," Webb said reluctantly. "Miss Isabella appears to be very attached to Mr. Sterling and his son. Our surveillance suggests that this relationship has provided her with a level of emotional stability and happiness that she hasn't experienced since her accident. Any action we take against Sterling could have serious psychological consequences for her." For a moment, something flickered across Alaric's face, a shadow of uncertainty, a recognition that his daughter's well-being might be more complex than he had considered. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the hard certainty of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions and living with their consequences. "Isabella's happiness is not dependent on this man," Alaric said firmly. "She's confused, vulnerable, probably experiencing some form of Stockholm Syndrome related to his kindness during a difficult period. Once we remove the source of confusion, she understands that we acted in her best interests. She'll thank us eventually." The paternalistic certainty in his voice was absolute, the confidence of someone who had never seriously questioned his right to make decisions for other people, even adult family members capable of making their own choices. In Alaric's worldview, Isabella's disability had rendered her perpetually childlike in matters of judgment and decision-making, despite her advanced degrees and obvious intelligence. "Schedule a meeting with Sterling for tomorrow afternoon," Alaric continued, returning to his desk and beginning to organize the surveillance photos into neat stacks. "Make it clear that this is not a negotiation or a discussion. This is a business transaction with a very simple choice: accept our offer and disappear from Isabella's life, or face the consequences of refusing to cooperate." "Should I inform Miss Isabella our intentions?" "Tensions? Absolutely not. She doesn't need to be involved in the messy details of how problems get solved. Once Sterling is out of the picture, we'll help her understand why this was necessary. I'm protecting my daughter, Webb. That's what fathers do." As Webb left the office to arrange the meeting that would forever alter the trajectory of multiple lives, Alaric stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the quantum dynamics campus, watching employees hurry between buildings in the late afternoon light. He felt the satisfaction of someone taking decisive action to protect his interests, the confidence of a man who had never met a problem that couldn't be solved through the appropriate application of money and pressure. What he didn't feel was any recognition that he was about to destroy the first genuine happiness his daughter had experienced in years, or that his protective instincts had become so warped by power and paranoia that he could no longer distinguish between actual threats and imagined ones. In trying to save Isabella from what he perceived as exploitation, he was preparing to subject her to the very real cruelty of having her choices overruled and her autonomy dismissed by the one person who should have been supporting her growth toward independence and joy. The meeting was set. The trap was being prepared, and Alaric Beckett felt certain that he was doing what any responsible father would do under the circumstances. It would be weeks before he began to understand the devastating cost of his certainty. The warehouse where Webb had arranged to meet Liam Sterling was a deliberate choice, designed to intimidate and establish dominance before the conversation even began. Located in the industrial district between Brookhaven and downtown Havenbrook, the cavernous space echoed with the sounds of their footsteps and voices, making every word feel weighted with significance. Webb had chosen to conduct this meeting away from Quantum Dynamics' offices and away from Sterling's workshop, on neutral ground that would nonetheless emphasize the vast difference in resources and power between the two men. Liam arrived precisely on time, his work clothes clean but clearly marking him as someone who earned his living with his hands rather than behind a desk. He had left Noah with Mrs. Patterson next door, telling his son only that he had an important business meeting that might take a while. Something about the formal tone of Webb's phone call had put Liam on edge, though he couldn't quite articulate why the request for a meeting had felt more like a summons. Webb was waiting in the center of the warehouse space, flanked by two other men in expensive suits, who radiated the kind of controlled menace that came with professional security training. On a folding table between them was a manila envelope and a tablet computer, props in what was clearly a carefully orchestrated performance designed to demonstrate power and control. "Mr. Sterling," Webb said as Liam approached, his tone professionally cordial but devoid of warmth. "Thank you for coming. I'm Marcus Webb, head of security for Quantum Dynamics. I believe you know why we're here." Liam stopped several feet away from the table, his carpenter's instincts recognizing the setup for what it was, a trap disguised as a conversation. "Actually, I don't. Your call mentioned wanting to discuss a matter of mutual interest, but you weren't very specific about details." Webb gestured to the envelope on the table. "The matter of mutual interest is your relationship with Isabella Marino Beckett. Mr. Beckett has become aware of your friendship with his daughter, and he's asked me to address the situation directly." The way Webb said friendship made it clear that he was aware the relationship had progressed far beyond casual acquaintance, and his tone suggested that this progression was both unwelcome and unacceptable to Isabella's father. Liam felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the warehouse's temperature. "I'm not sure what situation you think needs addressing," Liam said carefully, his voice steady despite the growing sense that this meeting was going to change everything in ways he wouldn't like. "Isabella and I are both adults who've chosen to spend time together. I wasn't aware that required anyone else's approval." Webb's smile was thin and professional, the expression of someone delivering bad news with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Beckett disagrees. He believes that his daughter's circumstances make her particularly vulnerable to individuals who might not have her best interests at heart. He's concerned that you may be taking advantage of her emotional state and physical limitations for personal gain." The accusation hit Liam like a physical blow, both for its cruelty and for its complete misunderstanding of everything he felt for Isabella. The idea that anyone could look at their relationship and see exploitation rather than genuine care was so offensive that for a moment he couldn't find words to respond. "That's not what this is," Liam said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I care about Isabella. She's amazing. What we have together has nothing to do with her father's money or her disability. It's about who she is as a person." "I'm sure you believe that," Webb replied, his tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "But Mr. Beckett has significant experience with people who develop sudden interest in his family members. The pattern is always the same: initial kindness and understanding, followed by deepening emotional attachment, culminating in requests for financial assistance or marriage proposals that would provide permanent access to the Beckett fortune." Webb opened the envelope and withdrew a thick sheaf of papers, placing them on the table where Liam could see the official letterhead and dense legal text. "This is a non-disclosure agreement paired with a generous compensation package. In exchange for immediately ceasing all contact with Isabella and agreeing never to approach her or her family again, you'll receive $500,000 and a guarantee that Quantum Dynamics will provide Sterling Woodworks with enough contracts over the next 5 years to significantly expand your business." The number was staggering, more money than Liam had ever imagined having at one time, enough to secure Noah's future education and provide financial stability for decades. It was also an insult so profound that he felt physically sick looking at the papers. "You think I'm with Isabella for money," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You actually believe that someone could spend time with her, get to know her, see how brilliant and funny and kind she is, and be motivated by anything other than love? I think you're a single father with limited income and uncertain prospects who happened to encounter one of the wealthiest young women in the country during a vulnerable moment," Webb replied bluntly. "I think you're intelligent enough to recognize an opportunity when you see one, and caring enough about your son's future to pursue it. There's no shame in that, Mr. Sterling. It's actually quite understandable. We're simply offering you a more direct path to the financial security. You're simply offering you a more direct path to the financial security you're seeking." Liam stared at the papers, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. $500,000 would change everything for him and Noah. College tuition, a larger house, the ability to take on projects he was passionate about rather than just whatever paid the bills. It was enough money to transform their lives completely. It was also the price Alaric Beckett was willing to pay to purchase his daughter's isolation. "What if I refuse?" Liam asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Webb's expression hardened slightly, the mask of professional courtesy slipping to reveal something colder underneath. Mr. Beckett would be disappointed, but not surprised. He's prepared for that possibility. Webb activated the tablet and turned it toward Liam, revealing a detailed financial analysis of Sterling Woodworks that was far more comprehensive than anything Liam had ever compiled himself. The spreadsheet showed profit margins, outstanding contracts, vendor relationships, and projected cash flow in exhaustive detail. "Small businesses are fragile things," Webb continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining basic economics to a slow student. "They depend on reputation, word-of-mouth referrals, and maintaining good relationships with suppliers and contractors. Sterling Woodworks has done well for itself, but it operates on thin margins in a competitive market. It wouldn't take much to disrupt that delicate balance." The threat was clear, even before Webb began elaborating on the specifics. Quantum Dynamics had the resources and connections to make Liam's professional life very difficult if they chose to do so. Negative reviews, whisper campaigns about reliability and quality, pressure on suppliers to offer less favorable terms. Even anonymous reports to regulatory agencies about building code compliance. There were 1,000 ways to destroy a small business without leaving obvious fingerprints. "And then there's the matter of Noah," Webb said, swiping to a new screen. that showed school records, medical information, and custody documentation. Single fathers face unique challenges in raising their sons, particularly when work demands require long hours and irregular schedules. Social services takes a very dim view of situations where minors might be left unsupervised or placed in potentially unsafe situations. Liam's hands clenched into fists at his sides, rage and terror warring in his chest as he processed the full scope of what was being threatened. These people were prepared to destroy not just his livelihood, but potentially his relationship with his son, all because he had committed the crime of falling in love with Isabella and helping her rediscover her own worth. "You would really do all of that?" Liam asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "You would destroy my business and threaten my custody of Noah because your boss is afraid his daughter might be happy?" "We would do whatever is necessary to protect Isabella from people who would exploit her vulnerability," Webb replied, his tone suggesting he genuinely believed he was performing a necessary service. "Mr. Beckett loves his daughter very much. He's not going to allow anyone to take advantage of her condition for personal gain." The irony was devastating. Alaric Beckett was so convinced that Isabella was being exploited that he was willing to use extortion and intimidation to protect her, never recognizing that his own actions were the ultimate exploitation of her vulnerability and isolation. Liam looked at the papers again, at the number that represented more financial security than he had ever dreamed of, and felt his world collapsing around him. If this were just about him, he would reject their offer without hesitation and face whatever consequences came. But Noah depended on him completely, and the thought of his son being placed in foster care because of manufactured accusations of neglect was unbearable. "I need time to think," Liam said finally, his voice hollow with defeat. "Of course," Webb replied, gathering the papers and placing them back in the envelope. "But not too much time. Mr. Beckett is eager to resolve this situation quickly. 24 hours should be sufficient for you to make the right choice." As Liam walked away from the warehouse, the envelope heavy in his hands, he felt as though he was carrying the weight of everyone he loved. The evening air that had seemed so full of possibility just hours earlier now felt oppressive and threatening, loaded with the promise of loss no matter what decision he made. That night, after Noah had gone to bed with stories about the elaborate puppet theater he was planning to build for the neighborhood kids, Liam sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone. Isabella's contact information was right there, just a tap away, but he couldn't bring himself to call her. How could he explain that her father was willing to destroy innocent people to maintain control over her life? How could he tell her that their love, which had felt like salvation for both of them, had been reduced to a business transaction in her father's mind? The text message he finally sent was brief and devastating. "I can't see you anymore. Please don't contact me. I'm sorry." Each word felt like swallowing glass, a betrayal of everything real and honest they had built together. But as he thought about Noah sleeping peacefully upstairs, trusting that his father would always protect him and keep him safe, Liam knew he had no choice. He deleted Isabella's number from his phone and tried to convince himself that destroying his own heart was a small price to pay for protecting his son's future. In the darkness of his kitchen, surrounded by the handmade furniture that represented years of careful work and dreams, Liam Sterling grieved for the family he had, allowed himself to imagine, and prepared to live with the choice that felt like the only option he had left, miles away. In her room at the Cliffside Heights mansion, Isabella stared at the message that had just shattered her world into pieces, and for the first time in years, she understood what it felt like to have something worth fighting for, and to realize it might already be lost. For 3 days, Isabella existed in a state of suspended disbelief, reading and rereading Liam's devastating text message until the words had burned themselves into her memory like a brand. "I can't see you anymore. Please don't contact me. I'm sorry." The coldness of it, the finality, the complete absence of explanation, None of it aligned with the man who had spent months showing her what authentic love looked like, who had kissed her with such tenderness just days earlier, who had looked into her eyes and promised that they would figure out their future together. She had called him 17 times in the first 24 hours, each call going straight to voicemail, each unanswered ring feeling like another small death. The voicemail box was full, probably with her increasingly desperate messages begging him to talk to her, to explain what had changed, to give her a chance to fix whatever had gone wrong. She had driven to his house twice, only to find it dark and empty, his workshop locked up tight, as if he had simply vanished from existence. The Isabella of 3 years ago, the woman who had been broken by her accident, and had retreated into passive acceptance of whatever fate handed her, might have simply accepted this abandonment as another confirmation that she was fundamentally unlovable, another piece of evidence that her disability made her a burden too heavy for anyone to carry long term. But the Isabella who had been reborn through Liam's love and Noah's friendship was a different person entirely. Someone who had rediscovered her own worth and wasn't willing to surrender it without a fight. On the morning of the 4th day, as she sat in her wheelchair on the terrace of the Cliffside Heights mansion, staring out at the ocean without really seeing it, something clicked into place in her mind with the precision of a puzzle piece finding its proper position. The timing of Liam's message, coming so soon after their declarations of love and discussions of a future together, was suspicious enough. But it was the clinical brevity of his text, so unlike his usual warm and thoughtful communication style, that finally triggered her engineering-trained analytical mind to start questioning the narrative she had been accepting. Liam Sterling was many things honest to a fault, emotionally available, constitutionally incapable of cruelty or manipulation. But he was not a coward, and he was not someone who would abandon someone he loved without explanation or conversation. The man who had spent months teaching her that she deserved honesty and respect would not suddenly decide to communicate through cold dismissal, which meant that something else was happening, something that had forced him into this choice. Isabella wheeled herself back into the mansion with more purpose and energy than she had felt in days, her mind already racing through possibilities and plans. If Liam had been coerced into ending their relationship, there was only one person with both the motivation and the resources to orchestrate such coercion. Her father had been watching her too closely lately, asking too many casual questions about how she was spending her time, showing up unexpectedly in rooms where she was making phone calls. She had attributed his increased attention to normal parental concern, but now she began to see it as surveillance. The household staff had been acting strangely too, she realized as she mentally reviewed the past few weeks. Maria, the housekeeper, had been avoiding eye contact and seemed uncomfortable whenever Isabella mentioned her plans to meet friends. Thomas, her father's personal assistant, had been unusually interested in her schedule, asking detailed questions about her whereabouts that had felt intrusive at the time, but now seemed clearly purposeful. Isabella made her way to her father's home office, a sprawling space on the 2nd floor that served as his command center when he worked from the mansion rather than the Quantum Dynamics headquarters. The room was empty, as she had known it would be. Alaric was in meetings downtown until late afternoon, following his usual Tuesday schedule with mechanical precision. What she was looking for wouldn't be in his computer files, which were heavily encrypted and professionally secured. But her father was old school enough to keep physical files for matters he considered particularly sensitive. The filing cabinet behind his desk was locked, but Isabella had learned the combination years ago, when she had worked as his intern during college summers. Her father's password methodology was as predictable as everything else about him. Significant dates modified with simple number substitutions. Her mother's birthday, April 5, 10th, 1972, became 04151972, and when she entered the digits into the cabinet's electronic lock, it opened with a soft click that felt like a small victory, The file labeled Isabella Security Protocols was thicker than she had expected, filled with surveillance reports that documented her movements and interactions with disturbing thoroughness. There were photographs of her with Liam and Noah at the park, transcripts of overheard conversations, detailed background checks on everyone she had spoken to in the past 6 months. Reading through the clinical documentation of her private life felt like a violation, so profound that she had to stop several times to compose herself before continuing. But it was the final report, dated just 5 days earlier, that made her hands shake with rage. Webb's summary of his meeting with Liam was written in the cold, professional language of someone documenting a successful business negotiation. The threats to his business and custody of Noah were laid out in bullet points, as if destroying a good man's life was simply another item on a corporate to-do list. The amount of the bribe offer, $500,000, was noted with the same casual precision used for office supply expenditures. Isabella felt something break open in her chest as she read the final line of Webb's report. Subject accepted terms and agreed to immediately cease all contact with target. Situation resolved with minimal complications. Liam hadn't abandoned her because he had stopped caring or because loving her had become too difficult. He had been threatened, cornered, forced to choose between protecting his son and protecting their relationship. Her father had weaponized Liam's love for Noah against him, using the threat of taking away everything that mattered to force him into compliance. The betrayal was complete and devastating, but it was also clarifying in a way that cut through months of confusion and self-doubt. Isabella finally understood why her father had been so resistant to her recovery, so uncomfortable with her increasing independence and happiness. It wasn't concern for her well-being that motivated his overprotection. It was fear of losing control, terror that she might build a life that didn't revolve around his guilt and his need to manage her as a problem rather than love her as a daughter. For the first time in 3 years, Isabella felt the full force of her own anger, clean and pure and righteous. Not the helpless rage of someone trapped by circumstances beyond their control, but the focused fury of someone who had been wronged and was prepared to fight back. She photographed every page of Webb's report with her phone, documenting the evidence of her father's interference and the specific threats that had been used to destroy her relationship. Then she began to plan. Isabella knew that confronting her father directly would be futile. He would simply deny everything, claim that his actions had been necessary for her protection, and implement even tighter security to prevent future complications. If she wanted to have any hope of rebuilding what had been destroyed, she needed to reach Liam first, to explain what had really happened, and to give him the choice that her father had stolen from both of them. But finding Liam wouldn't be simple. Webb's report indicated that Sterling Woodworks had closed temporarily, with all pending contracts postponed indefinitely. Liam and Noah had essentially disappeared, probably staying with friends or relatives while they figured out how to rebuild their lives around the threats that had been made. Isabella's usual channels of contact, his phone, his house, his workshop, had all been severed, leaving her to find more creative approaches. The solution came to her as she remembered Noah's endless chatter about his school and his friends. During their park meetings, Maplewood Elementary was where Noah attended 3rd grade, the same school where Sarah had taught before her death. It was also where Liam volunteered for carpentry projects and where Noah participated in after-school programs when his father's work schedule required extended hours. If they were still in the area, still trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Noah's sake, the school would be the most likely place to track them down. Isabella waited until evening, when the household staff had finished their duties and retired to their quarters, before implementing her escape plan. She had learned over the years that the mansion's security system was designed to keep intruders out rather than to keep residents in, and the staff had grown complacent about monitoring her movements within the property. Her wheelchair was equipped with a quiet electric motor that could navigate the mansion's hallways and the paved pathways of the estate without triggering motion sensors or alerting anyone to her departure. She had packed a small bag with essentials. Phone, the photographs of Webb's report, enough cash to handle immediate expenses, and the handmade card Noah had given her on that first day at Willowbrook Cafe. The card had become a talisman of sorts, a reminder that genuine kindness existed in the world and that love could transcend the barriers that wealth and power tried to construct. The drive to Brookhaven in her specially adapted car felt like the longest journey of her life, even though the actual distance was less than 30 miles. Every traffic light felt like an opportunity for her father's security team to catch up with her. Every turn felt like it might be taking her further away from any possibility of redemption. But as she pulled into the parking lot of Maplewood Elementary, she felt something she hadn't experienced in days. Hope. The school was officially closed for the evening, but Isabella could see lights on in the gymnasium and hear the sounds of what appeared to be a community meeting or event. She navigated her wheelchair to the main entrance, where a hand-lettered sign announced Emergency Community Support Meeting, all welcome. Her heart began to race as she realized that this might be exactly the opportunity she needed. Inside the gymnasium, she found approximately 50 people gathered in folding chairs arranged in rough circles, their faces showing the particular combination of stress and determination that came with communities facing crisis together. At the front of the room, she spotted a familiar figure, Mrs. Henderson, Noah's teacher, whom Isabella had met during one of their park encounters when the woman had stopped to chat with her former colleague's family. Isabella? Mrs. Henderson's voice carried surprise and concern as she approached. What are you doing here? Is everything all right? I'm looking for Liam and Noah, Isabella said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. I think there's been a misunderstanding that needs to be cleared up. It's very important that I speak with them. Mrs. Henderson's expression grew cautious, and Isabella realized that Liam had probably explained his sudden departure in terms that made her father's interference sound like a mutual decision rather than coercion. Isabella, I think maybe you should talk to your family about this. Liam seemed pretty certain that it was best for everyone if you two didn't see each other anymore. Mrs. Henderson, Isabella said, pulling out her phone to show the photographed pages of Webb's report. I need you to look at something. My father had Liam threatened. He was forced to end our relationship to protect Noah. This is documentation of exactly what happened and why. As Mrs. Henderson read through the evidence, her expression shifted from cautious concern to outraged comprehension. My God, she whispered. They threatened to take Noah away from him, over you two being together? My father is convinced that anyone who cares about me must be after money, Isabella explained. He couldn't understand that Liam might love me for who I am rather than what I represent. So he made sure that loving me became too dangerous for Liam to risk. Mrs. Henderson looked around the gymnasium, then back at Isabella with a mixture of sympathy and determination. They're here, she said quietly. Liam and Noah. They've been staying with the Martinez family since this whole thing started. Liam's been helping with emergency repairs around the neighborhood in exchange for room and board, trying to keep busy while he figures out what to do next. Isabella felt her heart stop and restart in the space of a single breath. They're here? Now? Over there, Mrs. Henderson said, gesturing toward a corner of the gym where Isabella could see Liam's familiar profile as he worked with a small group to organize boxes of donated supplies. Noah was beside him, chattering animatedly with other kids as they sorted through toys and books. For a moment, Isabella felt paralyzed by the enormity of what she was about to attempt. There were no guarantees that Liam would believe her explanation, no promises that showing him the evidence of her father's interference would be enough to overcome the fear that had driven him away. But as she watched Noah's animated gestures, and heard the echo of his laughter across the gymnasium. She realized that she had no choice but to try. She began rolling her wheelchair across the gymnasium floor, weaving between groups of volunteers and stacks of supplies, her heart pounding, with the rhythm of someone approaching the most important conversation of her life. This was her moment to choose courage over comfort, truth over safety, love over the fear that had been used to manipulate them both. When Liam looked up and saw her approaching, the expression that crossed his face was so complex: surprise, pain, longing, fear, and something that might have been relief, that Isabella knew with absolute certainty that her instincts had been correct. This man loved her still, had never stopped loving her, and was about to learn that the impossible choice he had been forced to make was based on lies and manipulation rather than genuine necessity. Isabella, he breathed, her name carrying the weight of everything they had lost and everything they might still be able to save. "We need to talk," she said, holding up her phone with the evidence that would change everything. "All of us. Because it's time my father learned what happens when you threaten the people I love." The conversation that followed was conducted in Mrs. Henderson's empty classroom, away from the curious eyes and helpful ears of the community meeting, but close enough that Noah could continue playing with his friends in the adjacent hallway. Isabella spread the printed pages of Webb surveillance report across the small student desks, watching Liam's face as he read through the documentation of exactly how his life had been systematically threatened and dismantled. $500,000, Liam said quietly, his voice hollow with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. "They really thought that was what it would take to buy me off. My father sees everything as a transaction," Isabella replied, her own voice thick with emotion as she watched the man she loved process the full scope of what had been done to him. "He can't conceive of relationships that aren't based on mutual benefit or power dynamics. The idea that someone might love me for who I am rather than what I can provide is literally incomprehensible to him." Liam looked up from the papers, and Isabella saw something shifting in his expression. The careful walls he had constructed over the past week were beginning to crumble, replaced by the warmth and openness she had fallen in love with. "Isabella, I am so sorry. I should have trusted what we had enough to talk to you before I made any decisions. But when they threatened Noah, you protected your son," Isabella said firmly, reaching across the small space between their chairs to take his hand. "You did exactly what any good father would do when faced with those kinds of threats. But now we know the truth and we can make different choices." "What kind of choices?" Liam asked, though something in his tone suggested he was afraid to hope for possibilities that had seemed permanently closed just hours earlier. Before Isabella could answer, the classroom door burst open with a particular violence that announced the arrival of someone accustomed to having doors open for them rather than opening doors themselves. Alaric Beckett stood in the doorway, flanked by Webb and two other security personnel, his expensive suit and cold fury creating a stark contrast with the cheerful elementary school decorations surrounding them. "Isabella," her father's voice carried the controlled anger of someone who had spent the past hour tracking down his daughter through GPS signals and security footage, only to discover her in the last place he would have expected. "You will come with me immediately. This situation has gone on long enough." Isabella felt Liam tense beside her, his protective instincts warring with the knowledge that confronting Alaric Beckett directly would only make things worse for everyone involved. But Isabella had spent the drive to Brookhaven preparing for this moment, and she was ready for the confrontation that would determine the future of everyone she cared about. "No," she said simply, the word carrying more power than she had known. She possessed. "I won't go with you, and this situation is far from over. We need to talk, Dad, all of us. Right here, right now." Alaric's eyes moved from his daughter to Liam, taking in their joined hands and the scattered papers on the desk between them. "Mr. Sterling, I thought we had reached an understanding about your relationship with my daughter. The terms of our Agreement were very clear. The terms of your extortion were very clear, Isabella corrected, her voice sharp with anger that had been building for days. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? Did you honestly believe that I was stupid? Enough to accept that Leon would just abandon me without explanation? She stood from her wheelchair with the fluid motion she had perfected through years of physical therapy, using her arms to support herself against the desk as she faced her father at eye level. The gesture was symbolic as much as physical, a refusal to be diminished or looked down upon during what she knew would be the most important conversation of their relationship. I found your files, Dad. All of them. The surveillance reports, the background checks, Webb's documentation of exactly how you threatened an innocent man and his son to get them to stay away from me. Isabella's voice was steady, controlled. But underneath ran a current of pain so deep it made Alaric take an involuntary step backward. I was protecting you, Alaric said, his tone defensive but already carrying the first notes of uncertainty. You don't understand how dangerous it is to trust people when you have our resources. Sterling was obviously what? Isabella interrupted, her eyes blazing with 3 years of suppressed frustration and hurt. Caring. About me? Treating me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed? Seeing me as valuable for who I am rather than what I represent. Webb stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this confrontation was taking. Sir, perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private setting. But Isabella was just getting started, and she had no intention of allowing this moment to be managed or controlled by her father's usual tactics. No, we're having this conversation right here, in front of everyone, because I'm done with private settings where my voice gets silenced and my choices get overruled. The classroom door opened again, more gently this time, and Noah Sterling peered around the frame with the curious expression of someone who had heard raised voices and wanted to make sure his father was safe. Behind him stood Mrs. Henderson, and several other community members who had clearly been drawn by the sound of conflict in their elementary school. Dad, Noah said uncertainly, his gaze moving between Liam and the imposing figure of Alaric Beckett. Is everything okay? Are these the bad men who made you sad? The innocence of the question, delivered with the straightforward honesty that only 8-year-olds possessed, hit the room like a physical blow. Alaric's attention shifted to this small boy who had been reduced to a threat assessment in Webb's reports, and for the first time, he was forced to see Noah as an actual person, rather than a tactical consideration. Noah, Mrs. Henderson said gently, moving to place a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Maybe you should wait in the hallway while the adults talk. But Noah had already focused on Isabella with the bright recognition of someone seeing a beloved friend after an unexpected absence. Miss Isabella, you came back. Dad was really sad when you went away. He tried to pretend he wasn't, but I could tell because he stopped singing in the workshop, and he kept looking at his phone like he wanted to call someone but couldn't. The simple observation delivered with complete sincerity created a moment of such profound clarity that everyone in the room felt the shift. Here was the evidence of exactly what Alaric's protection had accomplished, not safety or happiness for his daughter, but pain and separation for everyone involved. Isabella knelt down to Noah's level, bringing herself eye to eye with this remarkable little boy who had been her first genuine friend in years. I didn't go away because I wanted to, Noah. Some grown-ups made a mistake and thought it would be better if your dad and I didn't see each other anymore, but now we're going to fix that mistake. Is that man your daddy? Noah asked, looking at Alaric with the fearless curiosity of someone too young to be intimidated by wealth or status. He looks really angry. Is he mad because you made friends with us? Before Isabella could answer, Noah approached Alaric directly, his small hand reaching out to touch the expensive fabric of the older man's suit jacket. Mr. Isabella's dad, why don't you want your daughter to have friends? Having friends is the best thing in the whole world. My dad says that people who love us make us stronger, not weaker. The simple question, asked without malice or judgment, hit Alaric harder than any accusation or argument could have. He looked down at this earnest little boy who had been described in Webb's reports as a tactical vulnerability, and saw instead a person who radiated the kind of genuine goodness that had been missing from his own life for far too long. "Noah," Liam said softly, recognizing that his son had just asked the question that no adult in the room had been brave enough to voice directly. But Alaric held up a hand, his attention completely focused on the small boy who was waiting patiently for an answer that might actually make sense to someone who had grown up believing that love was something you shared rather than something you hoarded. "I was afraid," Alaric said finally, his voice quieter than Isabella had heard it in years. "I was afraid that your father might hurt my daughter the way that I hurt her, I suppose. By leaving when things got difficult." Noah considered this with the serious concentration he brought to all important problems. "But my dad doesn't leave when things get difficult. He stayed when Mommy died, even though he was really, really sad. He stays when I have bad dreams or when I'm sick or when I mess up and break things. That's what dads do. They stay." The observation was delivered without criticism or judgment, simply a statement of fact from someone whose understanding of fatherhood had been shaped by consistent presence and unconditional love. But the implicit contrast with Alaric's own parenting approach was devastating in its clarity. Isabella watched her father's face as Noah's words sank in, and she saw something she hadn't witnessed in 3 years, genuine self-reflection. The armor of business logic and protective rationalization was cracking, revealing the fear and guilt that had been driving his behavior since her accident. "You're right," Alaric said quietly, speaking directly to Noah with more honesty than he had shown in any conversation in recent memory. "That is what fathers should do. They should stay, and they should trust their daughters to make good decisions about who deserves their love." He straightened slowly, his gaze moving from Noah to Liam, finally landing on Isabella with an expression she had almost forgotten he was capable of, vulnerability mixed with genuine remorse. "Remorse. Isabella," he said, his voice breaking slightly on her name, "I have made so many mistakes. With you, with your recovery, with this." He gestured toward the papers scattered on the desk, documentation of his interference and control. "I was so terrified of losing you completely that I drove away the people who were making you happy. I turned into exactly the kind of father I swore I would never be." Isabella felt tears burning behind her eyes, but they were tears of relief rather than pain. For the first time in 3 years, she was seeing her father, not the CEO, not the protective controller, but the man who had raised her to believe she could accomplish anything, who had once been her hero and her biggest supporter. "Dad," she said softly, her voice carrying forgiveness even before he had fully earned it, "I need you to understand something. I'm not fragile. I'm not helpless. My wheelchair doesn't make me incapable of making good decisions about my own life. When you treat me like I can't be trusted to choose who I love, you're not protecting me. You're telling me that you think the accident broke more than just my legs." The truth of it hit Alaric like a physical blow, and Isabella could see him processing the full scope of what his overprotection had actually communicated. He had spent 3 years trying to shield her from the possibility of being hurt again, never recognizing that his own actions were the source of her deepest pain. "Mr. Sterling," Alaric said, turning to face Liam directly for the first time since entering the classroom, "I owe you an apology that I'm not sure I'm capable of making adequately. What I did to you and your son was unconscionable. I used my resources to threaten and intimidate you because I was too afraid and too proud to trust my daughter's judgment about your character." Liam studied Alaric's face carefully, looking for signs of genuine change rather than tactical maneuvering. What he saw there was something he recognized from his own mirror during the darkest days after Sarah's death, the expression of someone confronting the gap between who they thought they were and who they had actually become, Mr. Beckett. Liam said carefully, "I understand wanting to protect your daughter. If someone approached Noah with intentions I didn't trust, I'd probably react strongly too. But the way you went about it, the threats against my business and my custody, that wasn't protection. That was intimidation designed to destroy people who couldn't fight back." "You're absolutely right," Alaric admitted, his corporate mask completely gone now, replaced by raw honesty that transformed his entire demeanor. "I've spent so many years in environments where everyone wants something from me that I forgot how to recognize genuine kindness. When I saw how happy Isabella was with you, my first instinct was to assume you were manipulating her rather than simply loving her." Noah, who had been following this conversation with the intense concentration of someone trying to understand complicated adult emotions, stepped forward again with the problem-solving approach that was already his signature trait. "So you were scared that my dad would be mean to Miss Isabella like how some people were mean to you?" Noah asked, his head tilted to one side as he worked through the logic. "But now you know that my dad is really nice, so you don't have to be scared anymore, right?" The simple reframing of the entire conflict as a misunderstanding based on fear rather than malice created space for resolution that hadn't existed moments earlier. Alaric looked down at this remarkable little boy who had somehow managed to cut through years of complex emotional dysfunction with straightforward, 8-year-old logic. "Right," Alaric said, his voice soft with wonder at Noah's ability to find simple solutions to problems that adults had made unnecessarily complicated. "I don't have to be scared anymore." 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the newly expanded Sterling Woodwork Studio, illuminating the custom wheelchair-accessible workbenches that Liam had designed specifically for Isabella's use. She sat carefully sanding a piece of maple that would become part of a dining room set they were creating together, her movements precise and confident as she worked alongside the man who had become not just her husband, but her true partner in every sense of the word. The workshop buzzed with purposeful activity as their small team of employees, all of them carefully selected for their craftsmanship skills and their commitment to creating furniture that was both beautiful and universally accessible, worked on various projects throughout the space. What had started as Liam's one-man operation had evolved into something much larger and more ambitious, thanks in part to Alaric Beckett's investment and business expertise, but more importantly due to the vision that Isabella and Liam shared for creating a company that valued inclusion as much as innovation. Mrs. Sterling called out Emma Rodriguez, their newest apprentice, and the daughter of Liam's old neighbor, who had first taught him to see past disabilities to the people who used adaptive equipment. "The specifications for the quantum dynamics commission are ready for your review." Isabella smiled at the title she was still getting used to. Even 6 months after their wedding at Willowbrook Cafe, the same location where their love story had begun, transformed for their special day into a celebration that perfectly blended elegance with accessibility. The guest list had been small but meaningful. The community members who had supported them through the crisis, Mrs. Henderson and several other teachers from Maplewood Elementary, and Alaric himself, who had walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes and genuine joy in his heart. The Quantum Dynamics Commission was particularly meaningful because it represented Alaric's complete transformation from someone who saw Sterling Woodworks as a threat to someone who recognized it is exactly the kind of innovative company his corporation should be supporting. Isabella and Liam were designing custom furniture for Quantum Dynamics, new headquarters pieces that demonstrated how adaptive design could be seamlessly integrated into professional environments without sacrificing style or functionality. "The prototypes look perfect," Isabella said, reviewing Emma's work with the same attention to detail she had once brought to environmental engineering projects. "Mr. Beckett is going to be very pleased with how these turned out." It still felt strange sometimes, referring to her father with the kind of professional respect that acknowledged his business acumen while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Their relationship had required careful rebuilding over the past year, with both of them learning to navigate the space between daughter and business partner, between protective father and respectful supporter of his adult daughter's choices. Transformation hadn't been instant or easy. Alaric had needed months of therapy to understand how his grief over his wife's death and his guilt over Isabella's accident had warped his parenting into something controlling and ultimately harmful. Isabella had needed time to forgive not just his specific actions, but the deeper betrayal of trust that his interference had represented. But they had both been committed to the work of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than fear and control. Miss Isabella. Miss Isabella. Noah's voice carried across the workshop as he burst through the door with the boundless energy of a 9-year-old who had just discovered something fascinating. Grandpa Alaric is here, and he brought the thing. Isabella's heart warmed at Noah's enthusiastic use of the grandfather title that Alaric had earned through patient effort and genuine affection over the past year. The relationship between the tech billionaire and the energetic little boy had become one of the unexpected joys of their blended family, with Alaric discovering that being a grandfather allowed him to experience the pure delight of a person's company without the weight of protective responsibility that had so damaged his relationship with Isabella. What thing? Isabella asked, though she suspected she already knew. The surprise thing for the baby. Noah announced with the pride of someone who had been entrusted with important secret-keeping responsibilities. It's finally finished, and it's so cool. It has buttons and lights and everything. Liam emerged from the back office where he had been working on project estimates, his face bright with the same anticipation that had been building in all of them for weeks. At 32, he had grown into the role of husband and stepfather-to-be, with the same natural grace he brought to his woodworking, approaching family life as another craft to be learned through patient practice and genuine love. Is he talking about what I think he's talking about? Liam asked, wrapping his arms around Isabella's shoulders from behind and resting his hands gently on the growing curve of her belly where their daughter was developing with the same steady progress that had characterized their entire relationship. I think he definitely is, Isabella replied, leaning back against her husband's chest and feeling the familiar sense of complete contentment that came with being exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people who made her feel most herself. Alaric appeared in the workshop doorway, carrying a large wooden object covered in a soft blue cloth, his face showing the particular combination of pride and nervousness that came with presenting a project he had worked on with his own hands rather than simply purchasing with his wealth. Learning to create things rather than simply acquiring them had been part of his personal transformation, and the handmade gift he carried represented months of secret collaboration with Liam and Noah. I hope you don't mind the interruption, Alaric said, his tone carrying the respect for Isabella's workspace and professional time that had taken him time to learn. But Noah was very insistent that today was the perfect day for the unveiling. Isabella positioned her wheelchair so she could see the covered object clearly, her curiosity building as she tried to guess what her father might have created. Over the past year, he had thrown himself into learning basic woodworking skills, with the same intensity he had once applied to corporate acquisitions, spending weekend hours in Liam's workshop and following Noah around like an eager apprentice. Can I do the revealing? Noah asked, practically vibrating with excitement as he positioned himself next to Alaric. I helped with the really important parts. Go ahead, buddy, Liam said, his arm still draped protectively around Isabella's shoulders as they prepared to see whatever labor of love had been consuming so much of Noah's attention lately. Noah whipped away the cloth with the dramatic flair of someone who understood the importance of a good reveal, exposing a beautiful handcrafted rocking chair designed specifically for Isabella's use. The seat was positioned at exactly the right height for easy transfer from her wheelchair, with carefully padded armrests and a curved back that would provide perfect support for nursing. But what made the chair truly special were the interactive elements that Noah had clearly insisted upon: small LED lights embedded in the wooden arms that could provide gentle nighttime illumination, a built-in music box that played Sarah's favorite lullaby, and hidden compartments for storing nursing supplies and baby essentials. "Oh my God," Isabella whispered, her hands moving to cover her mouth as she processed the full scope of what her father and Noah had created together. "It's absolutely perfect. Grandpa Alaric taught me how to sand without getting splinters," Noah announced proudly, "and I picked out where all the lights should go. Plus, we recorded some of my favorite stories so the baby can hear them even when I'm at school." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face as she took in every detail of the chair, seeing not just the craftsmanship, but the love that had motivated every decision. This was what family looked like when it was built on choice and care, rather than obligation and control. People working together to create something beautiful for someone they loved, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "Dad," she said softly, looking up at Ulrich with wonder and gratitude, "I don't know what to say. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Alaric knelt beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level in a gesture that had become natural over the past year as he learned to engage with her as an equal rather than someone to be managed from above. "Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "a year ago, I was so afraid of losing you that I almost destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to you. I can't undo those mistakes, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure that this little girl grows up knowing that her family believes in love instead of fear, in trust instead of control." Isabella reached out to take her father's hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that represented everything they had rebuilt together. "She's going to know exactly what it feels like to be unconditionally loved by her grandfather," she said firmly. "And she's going to grow up understanding that the best families are the ones we choose to build together." Liam moved to help Isabella transfer from her wheelchair to the rocking chair, and as she settled into the perfectly fitted seat, she felt their daughter respond to the gentle motion with a series of kicks that made everyone laugh. The baby seemed to approve of her grandfather's craftsmanship, and Isabella could already imagine countless evenings spent in this chair, rocking her daughter to sleep while surrounded by the family that had chosen each other through trials and forgiveness, and the kind of love that grew stronger under pressure rather than breaking apart. "You know," she said, looking around at the faces of the people who had become her world, her husband with his calloused hands and gentle heart, her stepson with his boundless capacity for joy and acceptance, her father with his hard-won wisdom and genuine commitment to change. "A year ago, I was sitting alone in a cafe on my birthday, convinced that I would never matter to anyone beyond my bank account. Now I'm surrounded by people who love me for exactly who I am, and we're about to welcome a new person into a family that proves every day that the most important things in life can't be bought or controlled. They can only be chosen and cherished." Noah climbed onto Liam's lap with the easy affection of someone who had never doubted his place in this expanding family unit. "Do you think the baby will like to build things like we do?" he asked seriously. "Because I've been making a list of all the projects we can teach her when she gets bigger." "I think," Isabella said, her hand resting on her belly as she rocked gently in the chair her father's love had built, "that she's going to grow up believing that anything is possible when people who love each other work together to build something beautiful." The afternoon sun streamed through the workshop windows, illuminating a scene that perfectly captured the transformation of everyone involved, from the tech billionaire who had learned that true power came from empowering others, to the carpenter who had discovered that love could expand to include more people rather than being diminished by sharing, to the young woman who had rediscovered her own worth and was preparing to pass that knowledge on to the next generation. Outside, the world continued its complicated dance of joy and sorrow, success and failure, connection and isolation. But inside Sterling Woodworks, surrounded by the evidence of what people could create when they chose love over fear, Isabella Marino Sterling rocked gently in her father's gift and felt the profound contentment of someone who had learned that. The most beautiful stories often began with the simple question, "Mind if we join you?" And in that moment, as her family gathered around her and her daughter kicked with apparent approval of the love that surrounded them, Isabella knew with absolute certainty that no one should ever have to celebrate alone, and that the best families were the ones built by people brave enough to see past surface differences to the love underneath, patient enough to forgive mistakes, and wise enough to choose each other again and again, until choosing became as natural and necessary as breathing itself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.